Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY refit video, at least partially here aboard good old Athena. In a few minutes we'll head up to the workshop and continue working on the fiberglass dodger and the rudder from last weekend's video. But first there's something I need to take care of here aboard Athena. I need to grab some measurements of the structural members underneath the cabin sole. As I'm sure most of you recall, there are some issues with said structural members here aboard Athena. There's a small section over here that's pretty much rotten, and the rest of them are soaking wet. In case you're new to my channel, here's a quick glimpse at those structural members. This is seen from the companionway, and this is what they look like from the forward cabin looking aft. A few months back, I drilled a bunch of holes and grabbed some samples of the plywood core. This is the worst one, the one I said was rotting, and as you can see it's more like dust than wood. The rest of the samples more or less resembles what I'd expect to see when drilling holes in plywood. A very friendly and bona fide real structural engineer has offered to help me with some calculations, and that's why I'm here to grab some measurements today. The current plan is to lay up extra glass on top of all of these structural members, enough glass so that the glass becomes the actual structural part rather than the plywood that's there today. That's where the structural engineer comes into the picture. He's going to do some calculations that are going to help me figure out if that's a feasible solution. But for him to do those calculations, he needs some measurements. It looks like this is all around the same thickness, just around 45 millimeters. While I'm at it, I might as well make a little drawing for myself here so that I can figure out how much fiberglass and epoxy to order. The engineer also asked for a sample of the laminate so that we can have that tested to see how strong it is. Here we've got that little sample, and I guess the good thing about the condition of the plywood is the fact that I was able to snap off the laminate with my bare fingers and it actually came away pretty clean. It looks like the laminate is around 3 millimeters thick. The plan is to send this little sample off to a lab that's going to burn off the resin and then measure the amount of glass that's in this. That should tell us something about the strength of the laminate. And I fully expect this to be about as strong as a slice of cheese left out in the noon sun. That was, of course, a joke, but this is, like I said, only 3 millimeters thick, and it's chop strand matting. And from what I've been told, chop strand matting is not really that strong. So yeah, but we'll find out. I'm gonna head back to Obelix and put all of my findings into an email and send that off to the engineer, and I'll see you guys tomorrow at the workshop. Welcome back to the workshop. Let's start with some glorious sanding. In last weekend's video, I patched a bunch of holes here on the fiberglass dodger. If memory serves, it was somewhere around 121 holes. I used peel ply on top of the repairs, and that means I won't have to sand the bulk of the repair, but there are some little fiberglass lips here that I'll need to knock down before I start fairing, and also any air pockets and voids that formed underneath the peel ply, like the one I've got here, that I will need to sand. I've got my awesome Bluetooth enabled hearing protection, I've got my 150 turbo, and I've got plenty of sanding nets. Let's get started. And just like that, all of the repairs are sanded nice and flush. The little bit of epoxy that was built up along the edge has been removed, and so has any fibers that were poking out. So this is now nice and smooth. There are some places here where I need to re-establish this radius here, but let's just take it nice and slow and get some fairing compound on these repairs. Well, fair warning, if you guys hear some rattling in the background, it's just because Mr. Cement Boat Guy showed up, but let's get to the fairing. I'm gonna be using 105 with the fast hardener and 407. I wish I had some of the pre-mixed ProSet fairing compound, but this is what I've got. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not a bad choice. It's just a little bit easier with the pre-mixed stuff. I've mixed up 5 pumps of epoxy. Before I add any 407 to it, I'm just gonna take a little bit of the unthickened epoxy and wet out all of the areas I'm gonna be fairing. The trick is to go as light as you possibly can, otherwise it's just gonna turn into a slippery mess once you start applying fairing compound. To make absolutely sure I don't have too much epoxy on here, I'm just going to wipe each of the little repair areas. Let's get to it. I better work quick before this starts setting. Hi guys, it is a few days later and it's been a busy few days here in the workshop. I've brought this little guy along because Cement Boat Guy is bringing along his dog and they should be here in a few minutes. Yesterday I cleaned and sanded the first layer of fairing compound, and a little later tonight I'm gonna apply a second layer. But that's not all that's happened. We also now have this awesome table here. We've moved the incredibly heavy rudder up here, and that means tomorrow I can clean it, sand it, and start fairing it. I've ordered everything I need to make a mold of the old rudder so that I can start building a new rudder, and all that stuff should show up in the beginning of next week. Yesterday we managed to remove the glass from 2 of the 3 windows in the Dodger. It turns out it wasn't actually that difficult, so let's go ahead and try this one. Of course, now I might just have jinxed myself something fierce. On each end there are 4 screws that need to be removed. With the screws removed, I'll use a standing knife to cut through the adhesive or caulking. After running the standing knife down both sides, the frame is already starting to seem a little bit loose. What did the trick yesterday was just to give it a few taps with a hammer. And there we go, an almost like new piece of glass that I can reuse for the new windows in the Dodger. Sure, this will need a little bit of a cleanup, but I won't have to buy new windows. Ta-da! Clear as glass. There is something a little bit odd about these though. It looks like they're tempered. Now, why would you choose a tempered piece of glass over, say, a laminated piece of glass? If you guys have any kind of suggestions as to why they did that, go ahead and leave it as a comment down below. Coffee? Tea? Epoxy? With the last of the windows taken care of, I want to get back to fairing the Dodger. As you can see, there are some definite low spots here, so I messed up that first layer a little bit. But I'm not an expert, so that's okay, and something like this can easily be fixed with a little bit of patience. Patience, of course, meaning more fairing compound. This time around, I'm gonna try using my small fairing board from Flexi Sander. Good morning, guys. It is early the next day. Now, the fairing compound has only had around 8 or 9 hours to cure, so I'm gonna leave it for another few hours before I start sanding. The reason for that, of course, being the fact that it's not terribly warm here in the workshop. Now, while we wait for that, there are some other things I can do. For instance, I can open this exciting looking blue package. This, no doubt, has to be the fanciest pouch I've got for any of my tools. Would anybody care to wager a guess as to what this might be? Go ahead and leave it as a comment down below. I realize that's a little bit silly because you guys are going to see what it is in just a few seconds. There are 3 parts to this. There's this doohickey, there's this doohickey, and then there is my rotary tool from Bosch, or this might as well have been any other Dremel-like tool. The only requirement for the rotary tool being the fact that it needs to have a coarse threaded collar up here. Something that looks a little bit like this. Now, why is that important? Well, because this doohickey is going to thread onto there, like this. I actually got a little bit ahead of myself there, because before you thread this onto the rotary tool, whatever this might be, you need to put this doohickey on there. The contraption is almost fully assembled now. The final step is to install a teeny tiny little diamond wheel inside of it. Now would be the time to get in your last guess as to the purpose of this doohickey. This is called a TungstenMate. Tungsten, of course, in relation to welding. Whenever you contaminate the pokey little piece of tungsten here, you need to sharpen it. I've never used a TungstenMate before, but hopefully that will make the process a little bit easier. Up until now, the best suited tool we've had for sharpening tungsten is this horrific thing, which, to be frank, scares the bejesus out of me. The TungstenMate seems a lot less scary, and it should also be a little bit more concise, meaning the angle on the tip of the tungsten here should always be the same. Although that might not sound that important, it actually is, because it has a huge effect on your weld. But let's go ahead and take this thing for a spin. I am, of course, but an amateur, but to me, that looks like a nicely sharpened piece of tungsten. An expert I am not, but I'd say that's not horrible. Please bear in mind that I am still learning how to weld, so don't take any of the minor quality issues with this weld as any kind of an indication of the usefulness of the TungstenMate, because so far this doohickey seems pretty freaking awesome. What I like is the fact that I can keep this thing right here, so I don't need to get my butt out of the chair whenever I've dipped the tungsten. And also, this is going to put a consistent point on the tungsten. And by that I mean this is always going to be a fixed angle in relation to the wheel, meaning the tip is always going to be the same, and that's just one less variable for me to worry about. There's already speed and the amount of amperage and gas flow and all of that other stuff. With this, at least I'll have a consistent point on my tungsten. I will continue practicing my welding off camera so that hopefully in the not too distant future we can get back to building the new tow rail for Athena. Let's do another quick iteration over the design of the frames for the new windows for the Dodger. The ones we designed last weekend had a rather big radius on them, and that had a somewhat unfortunate side effect. The windows are a pretty snug fit into these holes. With the large radius in the design from last weekend, the window would simply be poking out the back, and of course that's not gonna work. So I've got two options. I can either modify the design of the frame, or I can buy new windows. And considering that the old ones cleaned up so nice, I think it makes a lot of sense just to make the frame slightly pointier. This is the basic idea for the new windows. There's a pane of glass here in the middle, 2 frames of stainless steel, and those are then sandwiched on each side of the glass. And then we're going to have some kind of caulking or adhesive in here. We're going to print out a copy of our drawing here and bring that out to the Dodger and tape that in place just to make sure that everything is in order. With each of the 3 corners loosely taped in place, I'm going to use this drawing to check the measurements. Before we start measuring from corner to corner, let's just check this area here. This says 100, that's 100 millimeters. So there should be 10 centimeters between this line and this line. That will ensure that the drawing is printed 1-to-1. As you can see, that is pretty dang close. Now I can go ahead and measure from this line and all the way over here. Looking at our drawing here, that distance should be 815 millimeters. It looks like I was way off. I need to move this corner aft about 3 centimeters. I've checked the distances from the top corner here and down to the 2 bottom corners. Now we know that this is exactly like the drawing on the computer. Of course, all of this is only really necessary because we can't print an entire window frame 1-to-1. All we have are these smaller sheets of paper. You might be wondering, is it really worth it to do all of this taping and measuring to check this drawing? And the answer to that is yes, because once this drawing is complete, that's going to get shipped off to a laser cutting place, and then they're going to cut the frames in stainless steel. So any mistakes, we want to make absolutely sure that we find those now. We've spent a lot of time going over different design decisions today. One of those decisions is what to do about this hole here. Now this hole is for the main sheet. There's also a hole here on the port side of the Dodger, and to be honest, I can't remember what that's used for. But the important thing here is that the 2 holes are not symmetrical. The hole on the port side of the Dodger is a lot smaller than the one on the starboard side. The port side one is also further aft, and it's further down towards the flange on the Dodger. Like I mentioned in the last video, I want to have something cover up these holes so that water doesn't go shooting in through here. It could be as simple as a piece of neoprene with a hole in it and then the line going through that. We talked about integrating that into the window frame, but seeing as I'm not really sure what the other hole is used for, and I might want to change the orientation of some of the lines up on deck, I think it's best if we don't integrate this into the window frame. Long story short, I'm going to glass over both of the holes, then I can get the Dodger painted, get the windows in there, get the Dodger mounted on the boat, and then when it comes time to run the running rigging, well, then I can figure out where to drill new holes, and then I'll have to come up with some kind of solution to prevent water from getting in there. Good morning, guys! Yesterday took a little bit of an unexpected turn. Cement Boat Guy and I ended up spending a few hours ironing out some kinks in the frame design. These are all of the design iterations we went through. But I think we've finally got everything figured out, so now it's just a matter of ordering the stainless steel frames and waiting for them to show up. More than likely, it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks for the frames to show up, but that's okay. While we're waiting for that, I can continue fairing the Dodger, patching those last pesky holes, building the rudder mold, and the new rudder. Speaking of pesky holes, as you can see, I've taped over this one. That is, of course, in preparation of glassing over this hole. On the back of the tape, there is a little bit of peel ply. The tape and the peel ply are going to act as a little bit of a backer for when I start laying up glass. I'm going to be laying up glass on the inside of the Dodger to minimize the amount of work I'll have to do to this inside corner here. Ferrying an outside corner like this one here is relatively easy. Ferrying an inside corner like the one down there is, well, the devil. Before I start laying up glass, there is one little thing I want to mention. I've seen a few comments asking why I even bother with the frames, why I don't just adhere the glass right to the Dodger, maybe insert it a little bit so it's nice and flush. Well, the reason for the frames is because I want the Dodger to look like the rest of the boat, and the rest of the port lights aboard the boat have frames around them, so that's the reason for the frames. I've already cut glass and peel ply. I'm busy mixing up the epoxy. So now it's just a matter of getting rid of those 2 pesky holes. When it comes to patching holes, there are 2 schools of thought. You either start with the biggest patch first or the smallest patch first. I have always, I think, done it the biggest patch first because I think that makes the most sense. There are a couple of reasons why I like having the biggest patch first, but I know there are also professionals that recommend doing smallest patch first, so I think, like I said, it's two different schools of thought, and to be honest, for what I'm doing here, I'm sure either one would be fine. From what I've been told, Boeing goes small to large, while Airbus goes large to small. In West Systems manual, they depict going large to small, but like I said, I'm sure for something like this, or for patching a hole from no through hole, either way is perfectly fine. I am sure we're gonna have a lot of fun with the small versus large first debacle in the comment section, but yeah, in my opinion, either way is probably fine. Personally, I prefer large to small. For the second hole over here, I still need to apply peel ply and tape to it. So let me just show you what I did. The piece of peel ply I've cut is just barely larger than the hole. And then it is just a matter of taping the peel ply in place, like that, and adding more tape to reinforce it. Of course, this method only works because this is a tiny hole. Had the hole been any larger, then I would have used some MDF or some plywood wrapped in plastic and peel ply as a backer instead. This should now be plenty strong for me to use as a backer for laying up that tiny bit of glass. Yep, that looks perfect. Now I'm not going to bore you with footage of me patching this hole because you've just seen me patch the other hole, which is basically identical to this one. Before ending this video, I just want to reassure everybody that Jökull, or Mr. Snuggles, is settling in well here in the shop, and he's even got his very own shelf underneath the table. It's probably a good thing he's getting in a little nap now, because I think Cement Boat Guy is going to bring his dog here in a few hours, and that is going to be a whole lot of fun. So yeah, sleep tight, Mr. Snuggies. And that is going to be it for this video. I hope to see you guys back here next weekend, where we're going to build the mold for the rudder and maybe do a few experiments with some vacuum infusion. I think that could be a lot of fun. But yeah, as always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!